After I made the video on Streetsville, I thought, well, hey, maybe I can make this into a little series. And Port Credit was a town not too far from Streetsville, and it had a history, and I wanted to put that into a video as well. Very few people have seen this video because of YouTube's algorithms, and that will probably remain the case. I wonder how many of you are watching this, but if you're interested in a little port town on Lake Ontario, it's nothing to do with Nova Scotia, and I apologize for that, but I just wanted a place to put this video, and I thought that maybe this was the best place in the interwebs to upload it. So that's what I've gone and done. Welcome to Port Credit. Port Credit is situated in the northwest corner of Lake Ontario at the mouth of the Credit River. It has its own story full of trade, the struggle of development, and reinvention, even before it was amalgamated into the city of Mississauga in 1974. In my previous video on the history of Streetsville, which I'll link in the description, I briefly covered the history of the settlements in this area along the Credit River and the trade that existed between the Mississauga tribe and the early European settlers. The areas along the edge of the lake were of strategic importance to settlers due to the early trade routes which needed to be accessible by both land and water. The settlement that later became known as Port Credit first appeared on a French map in 1757, and the first permanent structure, the Government Inn, was built by the English at the end of the 18th century on the orders of the Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe. The building served as a way station for travelers coming to the area by boat, but also overland for those who traveled around the lake coming from Niagara. By 1834, a small group of British and European settlers were living alongside the Mississauga tribe in what was about to become a burgeoning harbour settlement. The harbour was constructed around this time by both natives and settlers, including a few Jamaicans who were brought to the region, and it served as a fishing port and a trading spot for grain and other products. 3 Mississauga chiefs served as directors for the Credit Harbour Company, and 2/3 of the shares of the company were acquired by the tribe. They were heavily invested in the area, selling village plots to incoming settlers. Frederick Capriol, an Englishman who migrated to Canada, was instrumental in the early establishment of this port. He is noted for promoting the construction of the regional railroad and for building the Port Credit Lighthouse, which stood from 1882 until it burnt down in 1936. The lighthouse structure you see here today wasn't constructed until 1991. Capriol also earned the nickname Crazy Capriol because he apparently went all the way to London, England to try and get royal permission for the construction of a canal from Lake Huron to Lake Ontario. I guess construction times back then were a little slow, but for anyone who's driven on the 401 recently, things haven't changed that much. When the Canadian Pacific Railroad was built in the 1880s, Port Credit was bypassed, and much of the original trade began to dwindle. An earlier fire in the 1850s also disrupted the flow of trade to the village. Being the ever-resourceful community, schooners began to be used for stone hooking, the practice of pulling up slabs of stone from the lake bed for construction, and much of Toronto was built using this stone known as Dundas Shale. In its heyday, 23 schooners operated out of the harbour here, and an estimated 1 million cubic meters of stone was lifted out of the lake. The Adamson estate sits on the eastern boundary of the town. Agar Adamson served under General Arthur Currie in the trenches of World War I and returned to Port Credit. He married into the Kawarthra family, who were well known for supplying eastern white pine logs to the Royal Navy for ship masts, and Adamson was given the land on which he built a Belgian, or in particular a Flemish-inspired mansion. The property now belongs to the city and is operated as a public park. On both sides of the port, land has been used for industry for much of the town's history. On the west side, a brickyard was constructed on land purchased by Frederick Capriol from the Mississaugas, and later on this was sold to make way for oil refineries in the early 20th century. The Texaco oil refinery was based here until 1985, and since that time a significantly large parcel of lakeside property has been sitting vacant due to pollution concerns. On the east side, the Lakeview Generating Station was constructed in the mid-20th century, and the Four Stacks, or Four Sisters as they were known, could be seen for miles around until they were demolished in 2006. Over recent decades, Port Credit has been transitioning from a largely industrial area to more of a residential area, with highly sought-after condos and other lakeside properties. Out in the marina, there is the rusty Ridgetown freighter, built in 1905, and was used for 65 years to transport goods all around the Great Lakes until it was loaded with stone and scuttled to act as a breaker for the entrance to the port. The center of town here shows the clear contrast between the industrial base it once was and the more visually appealing residential community it has been transitioning to. With the ever-increasing cost of property in the area, some have more cynically named it Port No Credit. But for those who have been fortunate enough to settle here, the town has a lot going for it, both for its geographical location and its history of reinvention and enterprise. In these days of post-pandemic economic hardships, the people of this port will need to find new ways of overcoming hardships that have been brought about by the death of an awful lot of family-owned businesses.